In the final quarter of 1841, Bauer and Marx planned to write a book emphasizing the atheistic and revolutionary nature of Hegelian philosophy. The young Hegelians valued the critique of Christianity because, at the time, Christianity colluded with feudal absolutism across European nations, especially during the reactionary era of the Holy Alliance following Napoleon's defeat. On September 24, during a rally welcoming Welker, leader of the liberal opposition in Baden, Bauer delivered a speech declaring that Hegel's theory of the state surpassed South German liberalism in courage and resolve. On October 8, Prussian Police Minister von Rochow reported to the king in a letter. The king replied on October 14, instructing surveillance of all participants and Bauer's dismissal from Bonn University. Koppen received a severe reprimand, and Bauer was stripped of his right to teach. Under pressure, theology departments across universities condemned Bauer for criticizing the Gospels. Academic freedom vanished entirely. Bauer was suspended pending investigation. Bauer's close comrade Marx received a rejection letter from Bonn University. Marx would never again have the opportunity to obtain a professorship at a German university. He stopped revising his doctoral dissertation. The battle had only just begun. On November 15, Schelling, invited by the Prussian government to suppress Hegelian philosophy, gave his first lecture at Berlin University. Among the notable attendees besides Engels were Søren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialist philosophy, and Mikhail Bakunin, the father of Russian anarchism. Bakunin traveled to Dresden the following year, met Ruge, and became a young Hegelian. Engels wrote in Schelling on Hegel, "Ask anyone in Berlin where the stage is for the struggle over the intellectual domination of Germany in politics and religion, and he will tell you, the 6th lecture hall of the Berlin University, where Schelling lectures on the philosophy of revelation." Schelling's philosophy of revelation degenerated into a confused mysticism, disappointing even his own followers. The young Hegelians viewed it as a challenge to the Hegelians. Engels played a very active role in the fight against Schelling, publishing pamphlets like Schelling on Hegel, Schelling and Revelation, and Schelling, the Philosopher of Christ. Engels, a typical young Hegelian at this time, wrote, "Our task is to defend the tomb of the great teacher. All fundamental principles of Christianity have collapsed under the pitiless critique of reason. The absolute idea is to become the founder of a new era. It is the sacred duty of those advancing together with the self-developing spirit to make the nation aware of this colossal result, and transform it into German philosophy and the philosophy of life." Engels' impassioned words reveal that idealism's perceived potential for human agency to change history, and its sense of freedom were highly attractive to ambitious youth. Like Bauer, he still believed in the omnipotence of critique, thinking it would lead self-consciousness to endless progress. However, Engels' thought was more advanced than others. Influenced by Feuerbach, he believed this development must occur through the union of man and nature, requiring the establishment of a new social system, though the goal remained unclear. Ruge, in the German Annals, highly praised Engels' pamphlets, but mistakenly attributed them to Bakunin, writing, "It's astonishing. This splendid young Bakunin has left all the old fools behind." In November, Bauer anonymously published The Trumpet of the Last Judgment, expounding on the atheistic character of Hegelian philosophy. The pamphlet caused a sensation. Both Feuerbach and Bauer reduced God to man, but Feuerbach moved towards materialism, while Bauer moved towards subjectivism. Subsequently, their planned collaborative work with Marx was Hegel's hatred of religion and Christian art. Marx devoted significant time and effort to reading and compiling materials on art and religion, producing 7 volumes of Bonn Notes. The fundamental reason, however, was that his thought had begun to shift. First, he increasingly disagreed with Bauer's philosophy of freedom, seeing it as individualism elitism versus historical materialism. This stemmed from his own understanding, the influence of the Epicureans and Feuerbach. Marx mentioned having certain disputes with Feuerbach concerning not the principle itself, but its comprehension, the principle being materialism. Second, he no longer believed that religious critique alone possessed such transformative power. Intellectual debate was less potent than practical struggle. He vaguely realized religion was not fundamentally a theological issue, but a social and political one. Marx felt Bauer's critique, confined to theology and divorced from actual politics, was increasingly inadequate. As Marx and Bauer began to diverge, around the end of 1841, with the new king's decision to relax censorship, the young Hegelians remaining in Berlin, distant from the former course Bauer and Marx, formed a new group called the Free. They harbored hopes for historical development driven by the Prussian state, particularly pinning their expectations on the freedoms promised by the new king. They still aimed to follow Hegel's line, using critique to push Prussia towards fulfilling its historical mission, and, guided by Bauer's approach, primarily targeting Christianity. The Free attracted nearly all writers residing in the Prussian capital before the March Revolution of 1848. Hence, their style became more theoretical, abstract, and divorced from reality. A minority, like Marx's old friend Koppen, who defended constitutionalism against absolutism when criticizing historian Schlosser, still fought against reactionary political forces. In a letter on December 6, Bauer called the group's journal art and literature rubbish and condemned the Berlin young Hegelians, saying they believe in no power except that of their own intellect. The new king, like the bourgeoisie, detested the old bureaucratic ways. His ideal was a paternalistic state. He agreed to the bourgeoisie's demands to express their views in parliament and the press. The new censorship regulations issued on December 24 particularly emphasized the value and necessity of frank and loyal advocacy. On the surface, this offered more freedom than the post-Carlsbad decree version, limiting censorship supposedly only to deleting misguided criticism. Liberals were jubilant. The young Hegelian bull wrote, "We must enjoy this moment of grace. Even if it turns out later to have been merely a beautiful dream, it remains a great and splendid moment." Meanwhile, Marx returned to Trier in December due to the serious illness of his father-in-law, Baron von Westphalen, staying with him until his death on March 3, 1842. As Bauer put it, Marx needed to brighten the days for this man nearing death. Marx lost his closest old friend and supporter. He himself fell ill, and the friction with his mother deepened. He stayed in a hotel, no longer living with her. It was a bleak period. Marx only managed to complete one article in January, comments on the latest Prussian censorship instruction. Sent to Ruge's German Annals, T was Marx's first political article. He wrote, "The censorship regulation of 1819 allowed for this freedom, but was never implemented. Only the new emperor's directive finally put it into effect. Officials and institutions violated the law for 22 years, because subjects were fundamentally unable to protest against such violations. If the law itself is useless, how can we use the law to oppose its own evils? The censor has more power than the Roman censor, for he regulates not only individual citizen behavior, but also the behavior of public spirit. Censorship permits the investigation of truth. How is truth defined? Whatever the government commands is truth. The government posits Christianity as a fundamental principle. They care not whether it's Catholic or Protestant. In their eyes, religion signifies affirmation of the status quo, worship of the government's limitless power and wise rule. Laws prosecuting tendencies are not laws serving the citizenry. They are laws for partisan persecution of parties, divisive and reactionary laws. The laws decreed by the government are the opposite of the principles underlying law. What is anti-state is presented as the opinion of the state. The essence of the censorship instruction lies in the vain and arrogant conception the police state holds of its officials, trusting them infinitely, believing them omnipotent, while distrusting the populace infinitely. This fundamental flaw runs through all our institutions. The censorship instruction claims to uphold both religion and morality, but morality recognizes only a universal and rational religion, while religion recognizes only its own particular and realistic morality. Consequently, according to this instruction, censorship must exclude such giants of moral thought as Kant, Fichte, and Spinoza because they do not believe in religion and supposedly undermine decorum, custom, and outward courtesy. All these moralists proceeded from the fundamental contradiction between morality and religion, for true morality is based on the autonomy of the human spirit, while religion is based on its heteronomy. This article naturally failed the censorship. It's evident Marx was still working within the framework of German philosophical rationalism and the idealist philosophy of law. After recovering from his illness, Marx resumed intensive work. In early March 1842, he promised Rouge 2 articles. One was the long-delayed critique of Christian art, promised to Bauer and Rouge, which he continued to work on sporadically for a few months. The other was contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of law, the philosophy of law being Marx's main focus. He decided to critique Hegel's theory of the state, struggle against constitutional monarchy, and decisively move from religious critique to political critique, which Bauer and others avoided. This was a difficult task. Marx, at this stage, couldn't foresee that he would need to move towards historical materialism and communism a year and a half later to truly complete this project. In a March 20th letter to Rouge, Marx mentioned that Bauer had quarreled with Education Minister Eichhorn in Berlin, just as Rouge had quarreled with the Minister of the Interior. Bauer wanted to return north, foolishly thinking he could better challenge the Prussian government there. Marx harbored no illusions about the Prussian government, sharply contrasting with the free in Berlin, who placed their hopes on the new king. Bauer now sided with the latter. On March 29th, Bauer was stripped of his professorship and expelled from Bonn University. His long-held ambition to shape a new philosophy replacing Hegel's as the Prussian state philosophy proved a failure. This also struck a blow to the free, whose faith in the Prussian state wavered, leading them to intensify their critique of the government's reactionary elements. Bauer began to grow discouraged and evasive. Marx did not yet realize that he and Bauer were heading for irreconcilable divergence. Marx went leftward. Bauer went rightward. Members of the Free voiced their indignation. One work was The Triumph of Faith, or A Christian Epic in 4 cantos, co-authored by Engels and Edgar Bauer in June. It mentioned nearly all important young Hegelian figures, including Marx, whom Engels had not yet met. Bruno Bauer was portrayed as the leader, waving a book wildly to annihilate the Bible at once. Marx, the son of Trier, was a young man full of vigor, wanting to drag the broad canopy of heaven down to the earth.